Hey guys, so this is obviously a departure from the content that many of you are used to seeing. I have actually covered the war in Ukraine a couple of times, certainly in the beginning, and I actually thought I was going to cover it not constantly but consistently. And the reason I actually changed my mind was I was just finding it quite overwhelming. I was watching it all day, every day, and I just sort of felt like, you know what, um, I'm not going to be able to save the world, and it also doesn't help if I'm struggling to deal with my world by fixating on something I can't really do too much about. But it did make me think when people have been talking about the kind of obsessive coverage. Some people have referred to it that way of the Kylie Rodney case. You know, isn't there something more important you can pay attention to? And I think when you think about that question seriously, then there is something that I think true crime maybe can turn their attention spans to, right? I mean, you could say that a question that I kind of asked myself is, what were you paying attention to when Russia invaded Ukraine, when there was a war going on in Ukraine? But more specifically, there was this sort of idea of what if Putin did use nuclear weapons? What were you doing at the time? What were you thinking about at the time? Were you trying to, what's the word? Basically, were you conscious? Were you aware of what was going on in your world when the serious thing that was taking place? Were you worried about something that was pertinent, or were you distracted? It's kind of a simple question like that. And really, the article that brought it home was an article in the Financial Times. I'm a subscriber to the Financial Times, and it was this article that came up. Putin's nuclear threats cannot be ignored, right? And although I've seen this commentary before, I've sort of heard the talk about and the whispers and the statements about nuclear weapons. I kind of definitely paused when I saw this article, especially where it says, "But he is also desperate and cornered." In other words, the president of Russia is feeling desperate and cornered, and he does have access to this huge arsenal. Is he not going to use it? Right? So that's really the kind of background in why I wanted to cover this particular topic. So I'm going to be referring here and there to this article and then another one from Al Jazeera, but kind of in a general sense. If you think about it, like what is going on now in a way is um, the I don't want to overstate it, but you could sort of argue that the future of our planet is based on one man's personality and one man's thinking. Let me say that again. The potential future of us, of all of us, kind of hangs in a way on the thought process, the psychology of one human being. And his decision and his mood and his inclinations to do something or not. That feels to me like a terrible state of affairs for us all to find ourselves in. And it also seems like it's something we should maybe think about, if it's something that could affect all of us directly or indirectly, but certainly a lot of people directly, maybe it's something we need to pay attention to. Do you guys agree with that? So So just looking at some of your comments, SM Kovalinsky says that's frightening. Um, it's disturbing. I certainly don't want to be alarmist here. The idea is not to make everybody panic. The idea is not to cause undue anxiety. The idea instead is to say, guys, maybe we need to be concerned, legitimately concerned, right? And I'm just saying, in a way, maybe this would be a good use of true crime's time. I don't think it's hyperbole to say, like if what true crime often does is lie spotting, trying to tell body language, things like that. What about doing that with Putin? Because the stakes are incredibly high. Figuring out what he's thinking, figuring out what his intentions are, figuring out the end game to this, figuring out motive, right, essentially. And I did make the case that all of the factors that play into true crime, identity, relationship dynamics, timing, context, intentionality, all those things are intertextual to war and to a particular warmonger, a leader that leads his country to war. There's no difference other than scale and scope in one person killing one person and another person authorizing or whatever a war where thousands die. There are cover-ups all the time. There's counter narratives all the time, all that kind of thing. So Ricardo says, yes, what is his motive? That's a great question. Now, as we lead into this, because I want to defer to people who've been studying this and talking about this, the journalists. But if you think about it, the basic answer to that question is Putin's mindset has been a sort of make Russia great again mindset, right? And if you've been in America thinking about that mindset, the same mindset, make America great again, think about how that mindset feels if you're not in America. Think about how that mindset feels if you are someone who's not particularly friendly to America. What you're going to think about, well, America wants to make itself great again. And now, again, just think about what it feels like when you hear Russia saying, make Russia great again. How does that feel if you're American? Kind of feels like maybe we should respond. This is what they want to do. The same thing applies to other superpowers like China. What if China said, China, well, we want to make ourselves great again? It kind of then feels like, well, maybe we need to also do something, and so on and so on and so on. But that truly feels like a very deep-seated, rationale for Putin, who feels like, and I think he's got some cause to feel that way, feels like Russia's standing is diminished. Russia's actually, as parts of Russia's broken up and splintered off. It is true that this enormous nation, right, the biggest country in the world in terms of size, has literally been breaking into pieces and kind of defecting to the West. And so to feel like, wow, the fear that people had once upon a time of Russia, the prominence, the the respect the world had for Russia has kind of faded. And you kind of get the sense that that's what Putin wants to restore, right? He wants to expand Russia's territory again, but he also wants the world to fear Russia again. And then you ask, well, could nuclear weapons be part of that strategy? Even if it's a last resort, could it not be part of that strategy? If you fail, if your intention was to do that and then you failed, are you going to accept being humiliated once again, or are you not going to accept that? Does that make sense? Okay. The general says, I've been preparing for over 6 months. So as I said, it sounds like hyperbole. It's not. We need to know whether the leader of an opposing superpower is lying, and who better to take on that challenge? Who better to think about that and study that and analyze that? I don't know whether the behavior panel have done that. I don't know if you guys would know, but it would be interesting. It would be interesting to see what they say. I think it's important. Do you guys agree? Um, I don't know how much you guys have been following the news. I've tried to keep up with it, even though I haven't done it obsessively or religiously. But we do need to know what Putin means to do right now, right? It's different. The status of the war is different now to what it was in the months before, for a crucial reason. I'm going to deal with that in this episode. It's not just I've woken up and thought, wow, let's concentrate on Russia now. We are at a critical juncture because of a very specific reason that has been true of wars in Europe and Russia. This is true of the Second World War in particular, that by this time of the year, you need to have got your territory, you need to have made your progress and locked it in. Otherwise, you are those defeats get locked in, right? So that is why there's a critical component to where we are right now that is different to at any other time. Can you guys see this image? Let me pull it up. So Gideon Rachman from the Financial Times article tells it like it is. Putin's nuclear threats can't be ignored, especially not now, right? Especially not now. And then that is the sort of cover art for the Financial Times article. Okay. Amy Hall, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Leah Simpson says, I don't trust their nukes to even hit their target. Well, isn't that even more worrying if you said that? That is possible, but even mini nukes would be a massive escalation. I mean, that's still nuclear weapons. It's basically bringing a nuclear exchange onto the table for the first time in our lifetimes, or some of our lifetimes, I'd say. Leah says it is worrying. Tim says a friend of mine in Russia was lucky enough to get out just in time through a land border in Siberia. Debbie says the news is saying that there are Russian and Chinese ships right off the coast of Alaska. That is what we would like to see. The thing is I don't want us to talk about this after the fact, right? I don't want us to be sleeping at the wheel. It's like, guys, this is happening in the world. This is a world critical issue immediately now. What were we doing when this was happening? What were we thinking? That's really my point. It is also interesting that on the question, is Putin bluffing about nukes, only 18% of you say yes. If you add it's too soon to say to yes, then that's around about a third. So a third of you guys say he's bluffing. That means 2/3, the majority of you are saying he's not bluffing. and I kind of agree with the majority of you. I think you can't just dismiss it as bluffing. If he doesn't, let's say, ultimately doesn't use nukes, I don't know whether that. I don't think that means he was bluffing all along. I mean, is there a definite risk that he means to do it? And I get the sense that he does. You get quite a masculine idea from Putin. He tries to show how virile he is, all the things of him riding shirtless on a horse and whatnot. And part of that is showing Russia to be this powerful, potent force. And that is how the nuclear weapons part comes into that. And if you think about it, someone who's a tough guy, a big part of being a tough guy is you make a threat and you say, I'm not bluffing. And then you carry out that threat to show that you're not bluffing, to show how tough you are, to show how strong you are. That's the point. It's an opportunity to show your strength. So why wouldn't you use it? Why wouldn't you use your best, your strongest weapon? Liz Graham says he means business, that Putin, I don't think he bluffs. Yeah. So I think Putin's aware that he's got to be careful, but we've got to be careful because he's not a bluffer, right? And yeah, there does seem to be some desperation. So yeah, so that's also quite interesting. So other words in Rahman's article from the Financial Times, let me bring that back up, that pop up, that are further cause for pain, concern, are desperate and cornered. I've sort of mentioned there, desperate and cornered. I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to see recent news, but currently there's a mass exodus of ordinary Russians, the Russian public, right? Where's that image? This one. This is just one image that I'm showing you. There's a lot of news about this, but it's basically to bring home what is going on. Can you imagine if your country went to war? Wherever you are in the world, your country went to war, and you might say, I don't really think about it, I don't really care about it. Maybe I support it, maybe I don't, right? And maybe they were battling one or other country, but it wouldn't really affect you until somebody said, hey, we need you to go and fight in that war. We need you to quit your job, leave your home right now, and you're going to be dispatched with a unit, and off you go into war. And if you want to kind of get a sense of what that's like, do you know that Tom Cruise movie? What's that movie where he goes onto the battlefield and he says, no, I'm just an advertising guy. And he tries to escape that. And suddenly the reality of war becomes very immediate. I think it's called something about tomorrow. What's that movie with Tom Cruise? Let me just quickly check. Tomorrow. The Edge of Tomorrow. Yeah, that's it. Now, if you think about that movie, that's literally what you face. That's literally what you face. How can I make this a bit smaller? And in a weird way, it feels like that's where we are. We are on the edge of tomorrow. Is tomorrow, are we going to have tomorrow? Tomorrow, we're going to have tomorrow. But it's that kind of reality where somebody says to you, oh, this war that you've been just hypothetical. Well, now you've got to go and fight in it. Oh, well, now I don't want the war. Okay, well, now it's a little bit too late for that. That's how the Russians are feeling right now. That's not a movie. That's how the Russians are feeling right now. No, I don't want to go and fight in the war. No, I don't care about the war. No, it's got nothing to do with me. But actually, well, you need to, here's your uniform, here's your weapon, and you're going to the front right now. in a few hours, you're going to be shooting bullets. How do you feel about that? I really don't want to go. And so that is the result of this. This is the result of that, right? And there's talk that official talk that Russia wants 300,000 citizens, right? Citizens, let's say it properly. And it's been rumored that actually wants about 1 million. And if you think about it, those people feel like cannon fodder, that they're going to go there and they're just going to, not survive. They're going to literally be cannon fodder. Like the landings of D-Day when they arrived on the beach, that kind of thing, cannon fodder. And then you sort of ask the question again, maybe you do care about the war in Ukraine. Well, do you want to be cannon fodder, right? The troops, the trained troops are being, what's the word? The Russians' lines in Ukraine have been broken. And now we want to send kind of almost ordinary civilians, untrained, here's a rifle, off you go. Would you want to be in that situation? I wouldn't. And so you've got this kind of pandemonium going on, all these Russians just wanting to get out the country. I don't want to be sent off to war. And I don't know how many people do. Do you want to leave your job, your dog, your family, and maybe die? Well, you know what? How Tom Cruise felt about it when all of that started. He was desperate to avoid it, right? So the general says the problem is that he is already preparing the special weapons. So basically what's happening now is they're trying to avoid mass conscription, basically mobilization into the war with Ukraine. So that's another reason why I say I didn't just wake up today and go, let's worry about the war. Let's sort of have a subject change. Let's jump ship into something else. Now is a critical time. Like what's happening right now in Russia is a serious kind of escalation. Even the Russians are worried, right? That's why we need to kind of start paying attention to this, right? There's an article, Russians wait 50 hours at border to flee draft. That's from this article. There it says, I don't know if you guys can see that, 66,000 Russians cross European borders since Putin announced the draft. 66,000. So I would imagine that many of those are civilians. I'm a statistic. I'm one of the 66,000 that's going off to war. There they are. Some of these guys aren't even in that great shape. Right now, there's also a referendum taking place in. I'm just trying to find that article. Anyway, can't quite find it here, but the article was titled Russians wait 50 hours at border to flee draft. You must know how kind of clogged up the borders are. And when you start seeing the coverage, when you have a look at the coverage of all over, Russians are trying to get the hell out of there. It's like some of them are catching flights and the air tickets have gone up. Can you imagine trying to escape your own country, like trying to sort of like, I want to just get out of my country because my country wants to go to war, and your country is a superpower, right? That's how kind of high the stakes are. It's good to have Karina here. Karina's from Austria, and I think it's especially people in Europe that we'd be interested to hear what your opinions are, because I mean, I'm far away. America's also far away. It's if you live in Latvia or Poland or the Netherlands or the UK or France or Germany, how do you guys feel about what's going on? And not only that, Europe is about to go into winter where you're really going to need your home to be warm, and where's the energy going to come from? That's again why I say we are starting to move into a very critical phase. This war needs to be won or lost. Something's got to happen, right? So it's a critical time for everybody, for Russia, for Ukraine, but also for Europe, and also for everybody else who's sort of watching. It's like, okay, guys, this is it. What's going to happen? And there is a way to cut through all of that, and that's this horrible thing. There is a way to cut through all of that uncertainty. And then the question is it a bluff or not? Keiki says, I'm in Scotland and I'm worried. So again, I'm not trying to, what's the word, I'm not trying to make you guys scared. I'm trying to tell you what's happening and that it is urgent. That's basically it. I'm not trying to be alarmist at all. Is it alarming? It definitely is alarming. But then you don't kind of lose your head and go nuts. This is where you need to have a sound mind. And that's why I say we could start off by kind of doing, where's that image? We can start off by trying to figure out what is actually going on with this guy's mind. What is he thinking? And then how do you deal with that? I think you've also got to ask, if he can't lose, but then he does lose, are we prepared to accept that kind of response? And I think the answer is no. Well, then what do? Do you then allow him to win? It's quite a difficult question. It's a question that's too terrible really to contemplate, but we kind of have to now. But we need to start by trying to figure out, how does he think? What is he thinking? Where is this going? Right? So where we are right now, I've said this a little bit before, Russia's trying to nail down the Ukrainian territory it's stolen with sham referendums. That's going on like right now. I think yesterday there were 4 sham referendums, basically saying, okay, guys, we've taken this territory, vote on it, now it's official, now this is Russian territory. At the same time that they were doing that, there was like huge kind of confrontations, military confrontations, at the same time that Russia's kind of having voting going on, like, let's nail down this territory. There's all of these other kind of conflagrations, military conflagrations taking place. Can you see how the tensions are ramping up, right? Russia's trying to nail down what they've got, and Ukraine is kind of starting to push Russia out. And so Russia's responding by saying, well, we're going to just overrun you with thousands, tens of thousands of troops, whether they're armed or not. There they go, off you go. It's kind of a terrifying scenario that's playing out right now in our lives that we wish wasn't, right? The thing is not to make it more terrifying than it is, and to start figuring out, okay, what should we be doing? What is happening here? Where's the future going to be 5 days from now, 10 days from now? So once Russia's referendums are, I don't want to use the word legitimized, but once they kind of said, okay, this is now a Russian republic, this is a Russian state, then I think they've said basically, well, then we've got the right to defend it, absolutely, with including nuclear weapons. So in a way, there's a little bit of time until those referendums are ratified. Once they're ratified, then we go, then everything ratchets up another notch. Then it's, what is the West going to do? What is Ukraine going to do? What is Russia going to do? Now, the kind of interesting middleman in all of this, even though they're actually the direct man, is Ukraine. Europe and America might say to Ukraine, guys, I think you need to cede your territory. We don't want to make this any worse. But Ukraine might say, no ways. We're not giving an inch to Russia. And what can America or Europe do under those circumstances? And what if Russia feels the same way? This is our annexed territory, and we're not going to give an inch of that either. You kind of get the feeling someone is going to have to blink here, right? Someone is going to have to blink. And I think you've got to also think about what's the global picture. I mean, you can lose a lot by being wrong. So, so what do you do? So let me kind of reiterate that the question is, do the West sort of take a step back and kind of even ask Ukraine to sort of back off, or is this a bluff? You see why we need to do a polygraph on Putin? Also, do you see why the stakes are super, super high? Now, the reasons why it could be a bluff, and this is definitely worth thinking about. So it's not a fait accompli that it's not a bluff, given his personality. But the practical aspect seems like it could be a bluff, which is, and the biggest thing is, Russia is right next to Ukraine. So, and the whole nature of nuclear weapons is that they don't stay in one place. The effects don't stay in one place. Now, you can imagine if Putin did use nuclear weapons, he would face an immediate problem, which is that radiation is now going to be his problem as well. It's not like gotten rid of you, job done. Well, you created a serious problem for yourself. That's the other issue. You see what I'm saying? Did you guys know that Moscow, the capital of Russia, it's in terms of prestige and so on, it's basically New York, right? Is right next to the border of Ukraine. It's really not far. I think it's less than 280 miles. That's really not a long way. That's not a safe enough distance, I think, to take that step. I suppose you could argue, well, he could do something in the far west of Ukraine. I suppose you could argue that. He could have all of that radioactivity in the far west, which then becomes Europe's problem in a way. I still am not convinced that that's enough. That is a minimum safe distance. But then again, you've got to ask, are we dealing with a rational person? We're thinking rationally, but it's not necessarily that he is. I mean, we know that Hitler thought very irrationally towards the end of the Second World War. Hitler had basically kind of gone nuts. So it's not entirely a rational thing. And that's also why you've got to test that out. We know that in the beginning, when Putin sat down with Macron, he sat really, really a long distance away from him. So you kind of got a sense that he's quite paranoid about, I think he was quite paranoid about the virus. And then again, you've got to say, how much rationality is actually going on here? Yeah, so that's always the case in war. It's always the case in war. But again, that's why you've got to use, in true crime, you use your critical thinking to figure out what's actually going on and get a feel for that. So again, Moscow is less than 280 miles from the border with Ukraine. You might think that is a little bit close for comfort. I mean, I think that's kind of a deal breaker. Feels like that might be a deal breaker. But let's go into it a bit further. The outcome of this war basically rests on something as amorphous as Putin's personality. So, I mean, it's like basically the safety of the world right now kind of depends on someone's mood and how somebody feels about something. One man. That's kind of not a good position for us to be in. But that's also why I say maybe we need to spend some time getting to know this person. As far as I know, he's written an autobiography. Maybe we should read it. Maybe we should kind of study up on this guy so that we know where we are. And if, God forbid, the button is pressed, then you should also have some kind of strategy. Also based on knowing your enemy and knowing what's going on, right? I'm simply saying, and isn't it one of Sun Tzu's things, know your enemy? Do we know our enemy? Vote Justin out says that's not accurate. Not what's not accurate. Simdal says the next defensive line is the Ural Mountains. Okay. Liz Graham says, have we got time to study him though? Well, there's no time like the present. I don't think you want to wait until you say there's not time. Like right now, things are escalating badly. Yes, there is time. We can start. And I know some of my patrons have actually read his autobiography. And I've seen some documentaries where he's described as a narcissist, and I don't like using that term, but it does feel accurate, that he attaches his own self-worth in a way to Russia's, right? He sees himself as a messianic figure. He sees himself as sent by God to save Russia. That is kind of narcissistic. I don't really like that term because if you keep calling him a narcissist, you keep refusing to figure out who he is. But that messianic aspect is very, very dangerous because that touches on this idea of, are you rational? Is your thinking logical? Or have you got this sort of symbolic framework going on that's not really very realistic? The other thing that I think you can use true crime with is you say, look at how this war has played out so far in terms of the attempt to capture Kyiv and the initial mistakes and the initial, let's call it idealism. What that shows is someone who wasn't realistic at all, someone who attempted to do something very ambitious and made a massive miscalculation. That's the beginning of the war. Could the war end with exactly the same thing? Something that's very ambitious, but again, it's a total miscalculation. And it feels like this big mobilization is that. How do I get? Feels like this very big mobilization is that, again, another miscalculation. Or could you have another miscalculation after that? That's also why you want to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on, to say, where's this going? Are the miscalculations getting worse? Is the desperation getting worse? Is the sense of being cornered getting worse? What's happening? So right now, he's on the back foot, and he's trying to get himself back onto the front foot militarily with momentum behind him. That's what he wants. What the West wants is to see Russia's defeat and withdrawal, and Ukraine wants a total withdrawal, right? Now, according to this article in the Financial Times, let me put a link to, put the link in chat. If you guys possibly can read this article, it's really worth reading. I'm going to highlight certain sections from it. Yeah, that's definitely how I've been reading it. And narcissists often work that way. You know, if I can't get what I want, then I'll burn the whole place down. You really get that idea. Wow. Okay, so Vote Justin Out says Putin says he'll retaliate if the West attacks. It's got nothing to do with someone's personality. It's about freeing the world of the Nazis that want to control the world population. Okay, so this seems to be someone who feels like he supports what Putin's doing, and Putin is right to feel aggrieved. It feels that way from this comment. And so, if I understand that comment correct, it's basically saying everything will be fine as long as the West doesn't attack. What if Ukraine attacks? What if Ukraine attacks these territories? That's the other side. I don't know whether even the West can dictate to another country, do not continue. I don't know whether they can. I would presume they can, because if they're supplying Ukraine with weapons, and they have been, and if the West says to Ukraine, this is not looking good, and we're not going to have a good outcome. We need you to stop. We're actually going to stop providing you with weapons. It's hard to imagine that Ukraine wouldn't. I would argue. I don't know. I mean, you've also got to then study Zelensky, and Zelensky's been a surprise. The fact that he's been such a great leader, I mean, as a comedian, the fact that he stayed, he didn't run away, the fact that they withstood this, they've been so resilient to a massive superpower for 6 months. So that's been a surprise as well. There's also the message, if Russia does something, and which they did with Crimea, and no one does anything, well, then Russia can do something again. If Russia does something again and the world doesn't do something, well, then Russia can do something again. If Russia takes this step and it's accepted again, why can't they just take another step? And so on and so on and so on. Not only that, another country may be looking on thinking the same thing. China may be looking at Taiwan thinking, you know what, we actually want Taiwan. Russia did it. America blinked, the world blinked. Well, let's do the same thing. So there's a bigger picture going on here that's quite nasty. It's quite difficult to, you can't really simplify it. It's quite a complicated puzzle that we find ourselves in. And being distracted doesn't help us figure it out. We figure it out by being focused and by slowly coming to grips with it. Karina says he's lashing out at the USA and NATO for violating all treaties. So, I mean, he totally feels aggrieved. He feels aggrieved. And so if you say, you acknowledge that, and you say, the problem with this guy is that he's aggrieved, how do you take that away? All right? How do you take that away? Can you take that away? So April says, I really think that Putin is going to slam, it's not, unfortunately, it's not far-fetched, unfortunately. That's why we need to think about it. So if it does happen, we are kind of prepared, not that you can ever be prepared. So this is a quote from the Financial Times article, and I'm kind of even shocked that it's there, these words, right? This is a quote. It is hard to imagine Putin accepting even the less hardline Western position, since that would mean he had sacrificed thousands of lives for no gain at all. The possibility of nuclear war has always loomed large in the White House's calculations, and that is a good thing, given that miscalculation could lead to Armageddon. Those are chilling words. Those are chilling words. They're chilling because they're true. Just reading them out, I kind of felt chills. Really, I felt chills just reading that out. In other words, what he's saying is that it's good that the White House appreciates just how large this likelihood looms. And then there's a talk about miscalculating could lead to Armageddon. I mean, the fact that you're seeing words like this in a sober publication like the Financial Times, there's nothing tabloidy about the Financial Times, nothing fun and entertaining about the Financial, well, I wouldn't say nothing. You know, they do have a sense of humor, they are human beings, but overall, the publication is very intelligent and measured in their reporting. So to see words like miscalculation could lead to Armageddon is that is what got my attention. That's really what got my attention. Yeah, so as I say, it's astonishing reading these words in a serious publication like this, but this is where we are. Putin, unfortunately, is the type that won't stop until he wins. He feels like Hitler, due to his messianic mission, he cannot lose. And with Hitler, when Hitler faced defeat, he thought the entire nation was expendable. So if I don't know that much about this war, I've tried to sort of follow it. I certainly haven't followed it the way I did in the beginning. But if there's a war I do know quite well, it's the Second World War. I've definitely read a lot about it. I've watched a lot of documentaries about it, and we do know what happened with Hitler. When Hitler faced defeat, what did he do? He was prepared to take his own life, but he was also prepared to have his whole nation expendable. He basically thought, until the war ended, he thought, I'm a divine leader set into divine combat. He thought of combat as this war as a divine theater, right? And so as long as he was winning the war, he actually thought he was this sort of divine figure until he lost the war. Then he thought, you know what? The fact that I've lost and that we've lost actually shows that none of us are chosen. I'm not chosen. My people aren't chosen, so we deserve destruction. That's how that kind of psychology works. So on the one hand, God is with me as long as I'm winning. Well, when I'm losing, it means, you know what? I shouldn't live, and neither should the losers that I've associated myself with. They deserve to die just as much as I do because we blah, blah, blah. You know, that's how the thinking works. It's a very destructive, it's a very passive aggressive form of thinking. So when God is with you, war is good and you can take war in your stride. But when you face defeat, it's okay to lose everything. Your life, everyone's lives in total annihilation. It's kind of a fundamentalistic narcissism. If I live and you die, and I'm winning and your people die, that's okay. But if I die, it's okay if everyone dies. Do you follow what I'm saying? Let me put that up. It's a kind of fundamentalistic narcissism. If I die, it's okay if everyone dies. And that's why I say we need to figure out Putin's psychology. Is that the kind of person we're dealing with? If I die, it's okay if everyone dies. And someone was saying he's just turned 70. You've got to look at his backstory and you see that quite a few people died in war when he was a youngster. And you sort of feel like he's faced the costs of war firsthand. You kind of feel that way. Felisa says that is his thinking. Cheryl says Russia feels Ukraine should have come back to them as promised. Simdal, I must say, we always disagree, but it's good to see a diversity of views. Simdal says Putin is much more pragmatic. I don't know whether the attempt to try and take Kyiv was pragmatic. That was a total failure. There was like 40, 50 miles of vehicles that went nowhere. That's not pragmatic at all. Sending exactly what we're seeing here, exactly what we're seeing there isn't pragmatic either. That's desperate. But I must say, I hope you're right. I wish you are right. I want you to be right. I want it to be true that he is pragmatic. If he's pragmatic, then the results of this will be soothing and not so scary. The problem is if you're wrong, and if he is if he's not pragmatic. Is it true that he's got cancer? Is it true that Putin has cancer? I think it's just a rumor, but it certainly is in the media. I've just Googled it. But you can see there are not really any terribly valid sources here. Is Putin sick? Does Putin have terminal cancer? The Guardian. Rumors continue about Putin's health. That's like, to me, the best source. And yeah, I don't know if I put much stake in it. I don't know if I put much stake in it. That's the thing with rumors. Just check and look at who's talking about it. Someone says he has it in his eyes. Okay, so let me just continue here. So according to Al Jazeera, if a speech aired, in a speech aired on national TV, that's from this article. Can you guys see that? Can you guys read that? And so the quote is, in a speech aired on national TV, Putin said, "This is not a bluff." And this was 2 days ago. He said, "This is not a bluff, and those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know that the weather vane can turn and point towards them." So, if you ask the question, is he bluffing? He's directly responded to it saying, "I'm not bluffing." That's pretty chilling. That is, I think, pretty chilling. So let me ask you guys again, if you think those who said he is bluffing, do you think him saying "I'm not bluffing," is that something to consider? Remember, he positions himself as a strong guy, like, don't mess with me. And then, well, do you think I'm bluffing? What do you think about that, how those words and that posturing goes with what's already happened? SM Kovalinsky says it doesn't sound like he's bluffing. And that's why I say, if you are a reasonable person, and I think it's reasonable to say, you know what, this is actually quite serious, then we need to pay attention. Think about it. If you're a reasonable person, you're saying someone isn't bluffing about using nuclear weapons. Maybe we need to kind of stop what we're doing for a moment and pay attention, try and figure out what's going on. And that's why I say, that's why I call this video, in terms of the true crime community, hey, true crime, maybe we need to test this guy. Maybe we need to think about this guy. Maybe we need to study what's going on here. Maybe we need to kind of use our skills and try and predict where this is going. But most of all, let's pay attention. Stephanie says, did you share the cornered rat comment on Patreon? What an analogy. Yeah. Deborah D says, I don't believe he's bluffing. And Deborah's, you've got a military background as well in Australia. Soike Cat says he's not bluffing. So, like I say, it's not being alarmist. It's not trying to scaremonger or make up something to. It's not sensational. Wish it was. It's not sensational. And if you just look at that face, if you just look at that face, that expression, that looks like quite a serious guy. You know, if you look at someone like that who says, you know what, I'm not bluffing, it's easy to take him seriously. It's easy to take that seriously. The other thing, I don't know if you guys know, the other thing that adds reinforcement to what we're talking about is at the UN, the Russian ambassador walked out. You know, the various nations, including America, criticized what Russia was doing, and the American, I think it's the ambassador, I'm not quite sure, one of the ministers just left. That shows a real enmity between the world community and Russia. There's a real problem going on. There's also this whole thing of Europe being dependent on Russia, and then now they don't want to be dependent, but problem is they are dependent. You can't just do that and not be dependent. They are dependent. I think Putin miscalculated the appetite of other countries to put themselves out in terms of high energy prices. I think he thought America will not be able to stand inflation, for example, and that has been a problem. But other countries as well. I think he miscalculated that there would be this kind of resistance against what has taken place. So I think his ace card was the whole energy thing, and I think he miscalculated there. That's one of a series of miscalculations. Karina, who's in Austria, says we are dependent, especially on Russian gas. And that's the thing, we are now approaching winter. It's almost October. It's almost that time when it starts getting cold, and then it gets colder and colder. And so the stakes go higher and higher and higher. That's why this has got to be resolved like now. So quite interesting symbolic language there, referring to the winds turning the weather vane in our direction. He says he's not bluffing. Is he or isn't he? Can you see how true crime, you can apply a lot of that stuff to this? Look at his statements. Look at the words that he chooses to use. What's going on there? Think about the symbolism in things like weather vane. The weather vane is going to turn towards you. There's something darkly, kind of divinely apocalyptic in those words. There's something, I don't know, I don't know if you get what I'm saying. There's something kind of haunting just about that turn of phrase. Gypsy says we are transitioning to alternative fuel. This will hasten it. That is definitely, I think, the silver lining on all this. The fact that Europe has woken up, that the world has woken up also to, well, we need to get off fossil fuels right now. This is what can happen, right? That's been a major wake-up call, which is definitely good. It may even help us deal with another problem, which is climate change, faster than we otherwise would have, more directly than we otherwise would have. Sleuth and Sandal says Putin is holding out for this winter. Well, that is exactly it, is what happens now will be the status quo for the rest of the year. So in other words, what happens right now, kind of going into October, will lay down the foundation for the next 3, 4, 5 months. So November, December, January, February. Remember when the war started? Was it sort of, I noticed it when the Olympics just ended. Was it the 25th of February, the 28th of February? The war basically started just as winter was ending, but it was actually premature. The vehicle still got stuck in mud and tires burst, and it was still very, very muddy in Ukraine. Yeah, so Setlik says you can, he chooses his words carefully. So that's, again, that's what true crime can do, is you can look at words that is used. What is he saying? What is he trying to say? Is he consistent? How consistent is he? All of that's going to give you an idea of his intentions here. It's important to know. It's important to check. So I don't know how many of you are supporters of other crime channels, but if you go there, ask them, let's have a look at Putin. What do you think about that? Get more people thinking about this, talking about this. It's for a good cause. It's for your benefit, all your benefit, my benefit, kind of everyone's benefit, that we pay attention to something worth paying attention to. Cheryl says, winter's coming, gas supplies are critical. Putin does not bluff. If he comes against an obstacle, he removes it. Yeah. So this is a screen grab from the article from Financial Times. And just have a look at that. Many Western pundits think Putin is bluffing, right? So that's brought up. Then he says, but policymakers are more cautious. This weekend, Jake Sullivan, US President Joe Biden's national security advisor, reiterated that the Kremlin's nuclear warnings are a matter that we have to take deadly seriously. Then he goes on to say, those who insist that Putin is bluffing argue that going nuclear would be obvious folly. And this is talking about the location of Russia to Ukraine. But then Putin is cornered. He's also immoral and reckless. And you know what that touches on? You know what that touches on when you say Putin is immoral and reckless? That starts to touch on criminal psychology, where you say this is someone who's previously committed certain crimes. If you don't like the word crimes, you can say acts. But basically, when we look at whether someone could have committed a crime, for me, one of the most basic questions I ask is, have you lived a lie? Are you someone that has lied your whole life? Because if you've lied your whole life, because committing a crime, committing murder, means you must now lie effectively about what you've just done. And before you committed the murder, you probably thought, well, I'll just lie about it. You know, I lied in the past and I was able to get away with what I did. All I did was lie. Well, now I'm going to take another step, quite an extreme step, quite a big step, but I'll be able to escape accountability simply by lying. So for me, one of the big tests of how serious a criminal are we dealing with is, well, how much of a liar are you? And I always say, not all liars are murderers, but all murderers are liars. Let me say that again. Not all liars are murderers, but all murderers are liars. And typically, a murderer lies a lot more and a lot better and a lot more as a matter of course than anyone else. So with Putin, it's not necessarily does he lie, but does he have a history that is kind of a criminal history? And then you look at the gassing, the apparent assassinations of certain people. That's to some extent rumor, to some extent speculation. But one thing we know for a fact is Russians have died kind of in mysterious circumstances, ... And then you say, well, if someone has had something to do with that, so in other words, if you've killed one person or 5 people, are you going to really think conscientiously about killing 5,000 or 50,000 or 5 million? That's unfortunately the psychology we're dealing with. Do you follow what I'm trying to say? In other words, on the scale of what we're talking about now, if someone has actually committed a crime, and it works both ways. If he hasn't, that's good news. If there's a sense that he's a moral guy and that he's truthful and that he's sincere and ... that's good. On the other hand, if there's not that, then we may be dealing with a serious problem and a serious individual with serious, the world may be in a serious predicament. Hazel Eyes has just got here. Simdal says, I fail to spot the difference between Moscow and Washington. Our leaders are just more subtle about it. So, I don't know. I suppose you can say I support Putin. I suppose you could say that, but then do you support war as well? Like, do you support just kind of going to war? And then the next question is, do you support it enough that you would go and fight in it? I don't know. That's just how I would see it. Do you support it enough that I certainly support the opposition to what's been going on, that I would say I'm prepared to pay more in terms of gas prices. I would definitely say that. I would support that, right? So let's go on to say, so I think it's unfortunate that much of America's true crime community are preoccupied right now with whether a certain 16-year-old died because of drunk driving rather than something else, instead of trying to predict Putin's next move. Whatever his next move is, it could determine fates and futures beyond Ukraine. I think the other issue Putin faces is if he folds up his tent and goes home, as the FT puts it, the aftermath that he faces. So if you think about it, if he does what we hope he's going to do, so if you say, I hope he's just going to stop and go back or something like that. I hope this is just going to end peacefully. Then you say, well, how is it going to be for him if he does just sort of go back to normal? How's that going to be? Well, if you look at this, if you look at that, it's quite hard to imagine that if he does just say, guys, sorry, how can things kind of go back to normal? I mean, the whole of Russia has been turned upside down based on the whole mobilization thing. So, what does one do with that? Helena says, what could possibly be his end game? Well, I think it starts off with this glorious fairy tale of, I want to see Russia restored to whatever, make Russia great again. But when that doesn't happen, then I think it's a bit more chaotic. One's got to think about the same question with what happened in the end of the Second World War. As your choices become more limited, you can't really decide. You basically have your decisions foisted on you. But he is becoming more desperate, definitely. I think his end game is he wants to secure this territory. And then the question is he going to be allowed to? Yeah, I think that's true. He's trying to have more control. The question is, does he have more control? The question is he in a more controlling situation now than he was? What do you think the answer is to that? Those referendums that he's undertaking are to kind of get a sense of control and make it official. These are now territories literally controlled by Russia, right? Okay, so this is the reason why it's happening now, why everything that's taking place now is so fraught and so dangerous and so perilous. It's because the wheel is turning toward winter right now in Europe. When winter comes, the relative positions of the Russians and the Ukrainians will essentially be frozen. Are you following what I'm saying? It's because of winter that all of this is happening right now. This has got to be sorted out right now. And that's how the Russians feel, how the Ukrainians feel. That is how the all of these dynamics playing out. That's the natural ground zero of it. D. Fletcher says, if all these European countries are reliant, then yes, he is in control. So another reason, as I say, when winter comes, the relative positions will be frozen. That's why they're trying to get things done right now, because it's about to be kind of cast in stone. That's exactly right. You don't want to fight against, or you don't want to fight in Russia in winter. You will lose. You will lose not against the enemy. You will lose against the elements. So whatever you want to achieve, achieve it before the winter. Otherwise, don't bother trying. So some really interesting comments here. Thanks a lot, guys. So as I say, wherever things stand about a month from now will essentially be where the war ultimately peters out. In other words, I think whatever's going to happen is going to be finalized in October. In October 2022, the end of the story is going to be concluded. We're going to get ourselves to whatever the ending is. Putin's problem is that he's behind in gaining territory right now. He's gained territory and lost it. And so he's trying to lock down the territories he's gained. But meanwhile, each day that goes by, more and more hard-won territory is slipping through his grasp. And that's why he's done that. He's trying to hold on to all of those square kilometers that he's fought so hard for. He's trying to hold on to it, but he's lost so much of his armaments and his troops. He's desperate to kind of nail that down before winter comes. So he may win the battle, but Putin has played his hand, at least as far as that is concerned. He's played his hand. His population now know that they are kind of expendable, and they don't really like that. Like, they didn't mind the war, but now it's like personal. Now it's direct. So his own citizens are scurrying for safety. They don't want to be cannon fodder, and that could come back to haunt him. So, this whole idea that he can say, sorry about that, I'm going to go home. Well, not after he's just done this, the mobilization. It feels like he's thrown in all of his chips except the nuclear weapon so far. He's throwing in all his chips behind this. I don't think he's in control, but that's kind of like not a good thing. Him not being in control means he can kind of get desperate and go, well, I'll hit this button and that'll get me back into the status quo. So it's kind of a weird contradiction. You don't want Putin in control, but a Putin who's not in control is desperate and cornered. And you don't want this guy desperate and cornered. It's a little bit like what someone said about Lance Armstrong. The only way, how did it go when something like this? says something like, don't make Lance angry, because when he gets angry, he wins a race. But then when he doesn't win, that makes him angry, or something like that. Anyway, it reminds me a little bit of that. Setlik, it's not so much about the technology, it's about the people, and it's about vehicles in mud. So missiles aren't a problem, but it's about people and movement and supply lines. Supply lines won't work. Does that make sense? It's not really about the digital side, it's about the supply line side, the logistical side, moving food, keeping troops in place. That's really what it's about. Yeah. I don't know if, yeah, I think when you say ordnance, I think of logistics, supply lines. Not sure if that's the same, if I'm interpreting it the same way. So if Ukraine resists another Russian advance, right? This basically, if Ukraine resists this advance, and if the West assists in pushing Russian forces back to where they belong, it's going to put Putin in a humiliating position, right? Putin is going to face a humiliating defeat going into this winter, and he has got two options if / when that happens. The one option is turning off all gas from Russia to Europe. That's the one weapon he's got to use. And you might say in November, doesn't bother me, I've got a couple of fleece blankets. But in December, it might start bothering people. And then that's the one weapon he's got. And the other weapon is nuclear weapons. Putin will basically face humiliating defeat heading into this winter based on how things are going right now. That looks where things are headed. Now, this is my question to you. If you say he's not bluffing, if the way this war is going is that he's now mobilizing ordinary citizens and they don't really have a hope of changing very much, then you have a situation where you've got a guy who's in charge of a superpower, who's got a chip on his shoulder, and he's got these nuclear weapons. He's got this weapon that can totally change the trajectory of it can change the status quo like that. So it's almost like the ring of power in the Lord of the Rings. Nuclear weapons are like a burden. Don't use it, don't use it, don't use it. And what happens in the Lord of the Rings? Well, someone constantly uses the ring or wants the ring. Well, the nuclear weapons work the same way. Is he going to be able to resist the temptation to use them when he's got them, when he's losing, and also when he's lost even more than he's lost now? There are not a lot of people, I think even if you're a sound-minded, reasonable person, I think there are not a lot of people who in that position would say, I've got this incredible game changer. You know what? I'm just not going to use it because I'm just that kind of guy. So I don't think you need to prove that someone is a maniac or a narcissist or anything. I think if you look at just what's going on, like the temptation to use it, if he faces like total defeat, is just going to be too great, because it's like, I can't let you guys lose that win. That is the whole point of why I went into this conflict, to win. I had to win, I must win, and I'm going to win. Paul says, everyone must get their Russian mail order brides right now. Karina says, we also need to tighten sanctions. Assassin says they blew 2 gas lines south of Denmark yesterday. as far as I know, there's a Nord Stream gas leak in like in a body of water somewhere. I saw a picture of that. So according to Al Jazeera, back to that article, Putin is taking a maddening risk. This is a quote from that article. Putin is taking a maddening risk which could result in the collapse of his regime. So literally what they're talking about here is what's at stake here is the collapse of the Russian government, potentially. That's just that on its own is a very big, tense situation for the rest of us. In the same way that if that was happening in America, like a government is kind of forced to change, everyone would start shuddering. You know, whenever that happens, it's a shaky process. So according to Al Jazeera, Putin is taking a maddening risk which could result in the collapse of his regime, but just as likely could lead to Russia drowning Ukraine in a sea of blood and by extension defeating the US-led West in this conflict. You know, and the horrible thing about what I've just read is that as hyperbolic as it sounds, it's not hyperbole. That thing about a sea of blood, as hyperbolic as it sounds like it's exaggeration. It sounds horrific. It's actually not hyperbole. It's happening. This is happening right now. You know, where's that link from ABC News? Anyway, I think I showed you guys something from ABC News kind of a few moments ago where it says 66,000 troops went into Ukraine yesterday or something. That's going to create a lot of bloodshed, just like that. So can you guys see what I'm saying? This is really important. This is really serious. This is really something we need to be thinking about and talking about. And I want you to just, on your own, think about it. Don't take on more than you can. So don't sit and watch the news cycle all the time, but also don't ignore it. Yeah, I mean, that's really the message. Don't ignore it and try and get some of your creators to start talking about it as well. It's important. It's current. It's something that may affect all of us. In a way, it already has, in the form of these gas prices. I'm in South Africa, and we've been paying a lot more for diesel and for petrol. And there's news now that the petrol price is coming down a little bit further. But our electricity utility has basically been burning diesel because of so many other breakdowns to keep the lights on. So it's literally affecting the whole world. Now is really a good time to pay attention to what's happening because now it's coming to a head. It really is important. And if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, as it becomes colder, think about what happened in the Lord of the Rings, that darkness moving over Middle Earth. As it's becoming colder, things are becoming more fraught and dangerous in the Northern Hemisphere, especially Europe, right? So when you feel the cold in the Northern Hemisphere, think about the effects of this war becoming more critical with every passing day. That's how you must think about the cold. So if Putin is made to scurry, he may be tempted to shift his fingers towards those buttons with clearly annotated warnings. Do not press this button. If he does, he gets an instant victory kind of in that moment. If he doesn't, he faces certain defeat on the battlefield and likely at home. So will he or won't he? Will he or won't he? You know, and the incredible thing is you see a headline like this saying, US warns against use of nuclear weapons. Sorry, I didn't mean to take that away. US warns, this is a headline like yesterday. And given the context I've just given you, it's a cogent warning. It's something we need to pay attention to. Karina, thanks very much for that. Karina, I hope you're feeling better. I know you've been going through a tough time yourself. Stephanie as well, I hope you are doing okay. I know you haven't been feeling so great either. Stephanie says winters are going to be rough in a number of ways. So that's as far as I want to take it. I just felt like, as I say, I think there's a serious subject we need to talk about and we need to acknowledge. And so I want to reiterate, what were you doing when Russia went to war with Ukraine? What was true crime doing? And what is a better use possibly of our time, right? If nuclear weapons are ultimately used, and just say that, like with a straight face, just to say those words, it's words can't really hope to address the horror of that. You don't just say that. But it's like you see this headline that's right here, and you think, oh, maybe not. It's like this is reality. This is a reality that is kind of facing us, right? Thanks a lot, Liz. Thank you. This is a reality that's facing us, and we need to face it ourselves. We need to face it. If we don't face it, it may face us anyway, right? You get that? If you don't face it, you will end up facing it anyway. If it's if it's imminent. Renee says gas leaks in the Baltic Sea sabotaged. Bria is in France. Bria, how do you feel? What is being said in France about everything? How do you feel? Have you had your gas turned off? Thanks a lot, Bria. So, true crime is about motive, about is someone a monster? Is someone a criminal? What did they do? What's actually going on? Is there foul play going on? Think about with Russia. What's the degree of foul play that's in store for all of us? Maybe we need to find out. Maybe we need to get an idea. Not just some politician somewhere, and maybe not just some defense minister, but more of us. And social media can figure out what's going on sometimes and see things that others can't. Social media has actually played a role in the Ukraine war, where things have been posted, locations and things like that. Drones have provided footage that has helped people. Maybe that can be taken a step further. Sleuth and Sandal says Germany will be key. Bria says, if you can't run away from it, must you face it? Stephanie says, thank you for all the dialogue and open discussion. How far can you run? Debbie Witt says, I'm in the US and my electric bill for 1 month is now almost $500. Well, that is huge. Must say my electric bill has also been really steep this past month. Karen Davis says war crimes are going on for sure. I mean, that is the aftermath of war, is what war crimes were committed, and war crimes are the worst crimes of all in terms of crime, besides war itself. Bria says, we haven't had our gas turned off, but gas prices have definitely gone up, and there are a lot of Ukrainian refugees who have touched down in France. Yeah. The other thing is Russian people aren't necessarily the enemy. Like, I know one or two Russians in my environment that have married a South African. And how do they feel about the war? It's not that they are, in other words, a Russian isn't, I think, the enemy. The enemy, who do you think is the enemy? Is Putin the enemy, or is Russia the enemy? What do you guys think? Okay, so I'm at an hour 30. I don't really want to go beyond this point. I just want to thank you guys for listening. In a way, I'm surprised to have, over 100 of you guys in chat, just because it's something that we don't necessarily want to think about. In a way, we go into the subject we go into to not think about this. But I think it is important that we do. I do believe that. So thank you for being here. Mods, thanks a lot for being here as well. Members as well, thanks for the super chats. As I say, if you belong to other channels, maybe bring this up with them. It's definitely a good use, I think, of true crimes, the true crime community's time, right? What does he really mean to do? Where's that picture? So it's over here. What does he really mean to do? It's like this whole idea of putting Putin through a polygraph. What statements has he made? What are his intentions? Let's think about it. Let's talk about it. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. And I just want to thank Red Hawk, RD Hawk 929. Thanks very much for that. So I'm going to do another live. I'll probably delay it by an hour on the Adnan Syed case. So I'll be back on YouTube in about an hour. Take care. Thank you for listening. See you guys next time, and stay safe.